The whole point of geocaching is the thrill of finding a little treasure left by a stranger. But that thrill turned cold in my stomach when I reached into a hollow log and pulled out a cache containing the exact same, slightly chipped coffee mug I was drinking from that very morning. It was a cheap, generic ceramic thing from a big box store, but the chip on the rim was identical, a tiny, V-shaped notch right where my thumb always rested. It felt less like a discovery and more like a message. 6 weeks. That's how long I'd been in Northwood. I'd moved for a job, one of those post college fresh starts that sound so liberating in theory and feel so crushingly lonely in practice. My apartment was a sea of cardboard boxes I couldn't find the motivation to unpack, and my social life consisted of nodding at my new colleagues and making awkward small talk with the cashier at the local grocery store. I needed a way to connect with the city, to make its unfamiliar streets feel like mine. That's when I stumbled upon geocaching. It seemed perfect. A real world treasure hunt, a way to explore hidden parks and forgotten alleyways, all guided by a friendly app on my phone. The community aspect appealed to me, too. It was a network of strangers leaving little pieces of themselves for others to find, keychains from their travels, quirky little toys, handwritten notes. It felt wholesome, adventurous, and, most importantly, safe. My first few caches were a blast. I found a tiny, waterproof tube tucked into the knothole of an ancient oak tree in a historic park. Inside was a logbook filled with the triumphant scribbles of fellow cachers and a small, plastic frog. I replaced the frog with a souvenir pin from my hometown, signed the log with a flourish, and felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. I was hooked. I spent my weekends trekking through nature reserves on the outskirts of town and my lunch breaks hunting for microcaches hidden in plain sight downtown. I started to learn the city's rhythm, the secret paths and quiet corners that only locals and geocachers would know. I logged my finds on the app, leaving cheerful notes for the cache owners. It was on my 10th or 11th find that I first noticed the username, Geodude87. He'd found the same cache just a day before me. His log was simple, TFTC, thanks for the cache. Standard stuff. I saw his name pop up again and again. He was clearly a prolific cacher in the Northwood area. It felt like I was following in his digital footsteps, and for a while, it was a comforting thought, like having an invisible guide. The first oddity was subtle, easy to dismiss. About 3 weeks in, I was searching for a cache hidden near a popular hiking trail overlook. The clue was look for the lonely pine. I found it, a solitary tree clinging to the edge of a bluff. The cache was an ammo can tucked into a crevice in the rocks at its base. Inside, along with the usual trinkets, was a paperback copy of my favorite book, The Martian. I'd just been talking about it with a coworker, gushing about how many times I'd read it. I smiled, thinking it was a fantastic coincidence. What were the odds? I logged it on the app, great find. And what a surprise to see my all-time favorite book inside. Left a travel-sized hand sanitizer. TFTC. The next day, I saw a new log from Geodude87 posted just hours after mine. Glad you liked it. Keep exploring. It was a little weird, but I brushed it off. He probably just saw my log and was being friendly. The geocaching community seemed like a tight-knit bunch. Still, a faint prickle of unease tickled the back of my neck. How did he know I was the one who liked the book? Maybe he just assumed. A week later, I was hunting for a cache in a sprawling city park. The hint was under the weeping angel's gaze. It led me to an old cemetery on the park grounds, a beautiful, somber place with weathered tombstones. I found the cache hidden in the base of a statue of a grieving angel. It was a small, lock-and-lock container. When I opened it, my breath hitched. Nestled on top of the logbook was a small, silver charm of a dragonfly, its wings intricately detailed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I have a small, almost invisible tattoo of a dragonfly on my left shoulder blade, a piece of art nobody ever saw unless I was at the beach. My ex-boyfriend had called me his dragonfly. I hadn't thought about that in years. This couldn't be a coincidence. It just couldn't. My hands trembled as I logged the find, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I didn't mention the charm. I just wrote TFTC. Looking at the previous logs, I saw Geodude87 had been there 2 days before me. There was no friendly message this time, just the standard acronym. My mind raced. Was he someone I knew? Someone from work? I mentally scrolled through the faces of my colleagues, the few people I'd actually spoken to since moving here. No one seemed a likely candidate. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Dragonfly charms are common, right? It was just another bizarre coincidence. But the feeling of being watched was becoming a physical weight on my shoulders. On my way home, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Every pair of headlights felt like a threat. My cozy little adventure was starting to feel wrong. And then came the coffee mug. I had found the cache in a nature preserve about a 30-minute drive from my apartment. The hike in was another 20 minutes, deep into the woods, far from any road or house. It was a place you had to want to be. When I pulled that mug out of the log, the one with a chip that mirrored the one on my kitchen counter, the one I had just set in the sink before leaving, all my carefully constructed rationalizations shattered. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a friendly game. Someone was watching me, and they wanted me to know. Geodude87 had logged his visit just 1 day prior. He wasn't following me, he was anticipating me. The drive home from the woods was a blur of adrenaline and rising panic. I'd shoved the chipped mug back into the ammo can, slammed it shut, and practically sprinted back to my car, my ears ringing with the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves in the undergrowth sounded like footsteps. I felt 1,000 unseen eyes on my back. When I finally locked my car doors, the click echoed with a finality that didn't bring any comfort. It just felt like I was sealing myself inside a cage. Back in my apartment, I triple-checked the locks on my door and windows. I felt exposed, violated. How could he have known about the mug? My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I had blinds. But then I thought about it. I often sat at my small kitchen table by the window in the morning, sipping my coffee while scrolling through my phone, planning my next geocache hunt. The window faced another apartment building. It would be easy enough for someone with a pair of binoculars and a lot of patience. My stomach churned. The very idea made my skin crawl. My safe space, the one place I was supposed to be able to let my guard down, felt tainted. I spent the next 2 days in a self-imposed lockdown, jumping at every creak of the floorboards from the apartment above. I stopped geocaching. I deleted the app from my phone, a move that felt both like a surrender and a necessary act of self-preservation. I told myself it was over. No more game, no more clues, no more him. If I stopped playing, he would have to stop too, right? But the silence was almost worse. My mind, now untethered from the distraction of the hunt, was free to spiral. I replayed every strange occurrence, every coincidence, seeing the pattern with horrifying clarity. The book, the dragonfly charm, the mug. They were all pieces of a puzzle, and the picture they were forming was of a man who knew me intimately, without me ever having met him. Geodude87. The name, which had once sounded quirky and harmless, now seemed sinister. I looked him up on the geocaching website. His profile was sparse, no picture, no personal information, just a log of over 2,000 finds. He was a ghost, a prolific player who left no trace other than his cryptic username and the escalating terror he was planting in my life. After nearly a week of this anxiety-fueled hermitage, I started to feel pathetic. I was letting some anonymous creep ruin my life and my one hobby. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe if I just ignored it, he'd get bored and move on. My friend Sarah, from back home, tried to rationalize it with me over the phone. Lucy, are you sure? She'd asked, her voice laced with concern. I mean, it's creepy as hell, but maybe it's just some elaborate prank. Or you have a secret admirer with really, really bad social skills. I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. That Saturday, driven by a cocktail of stubbornness and a desperate need for normalcy, I decided to go for a hike. Not geocaching, I told myself, just a walk. I chose a popular, well-trafficked state park, deliberately avoiding the isolated spots I'd been drawn to before. I needed to be surrounded by people. I needed to feel safe. For a couple of hours it worked. The sun was warm, the trail was busy with families and dog walkers, and the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other began to soothe my frayed nerves. Then, on my way back to the parking lot, I saw it. Tucked into the informational kiosk at the trailhead was a small, wooden disc. It was a geocaching game piece that players move from cache to cache. This one was different, though. Etched into the wood was the familiar dragonfly symbol. My blood ran cold. It wasn't in a cache. It was just left there. For me. I knew it with a certainty that defied logic. I looked around, my eyes scanning the faces of the people milling about, the cars pulling in and out of the lot. Was he here? Was he watching me right now? The friendly park suddenly felt like a stage, and I was the unwilling star of a show I didn't understand. My hand shook as I flipped the trackable over. There was a tracking number, but also a short phrase burned into the wood: the game isn't over. And below that, a set of GPS coordinates. I should have thrown it into the woods. I should have gotten in my car and driven straight to the police station. But a morbid, terrified curiosity had taken root in my soul. Where did the coordinates lead? What was he trying to show me? Part of me, the part that was sick of being afraid, felt a defiant urge to face this head on, to see the end of the breadcrumb trail. Sarah's voice in my head was screaming at me to run, but another, darker whisper urged me forward. Against my better judgment, I typed the coordinates into my phone's map. My heart sank. They pointed to a location about an hour's drive away, a place called Black Creek Quarry. A quick search showed it was an abandoned limestone quarry, long since closed to the public. The satellite images showed a deep, water-filled pit surrounded by crumbling cliffs and dense, overgrown woods. It was the definition of isolated. The geocaching app, which I had re-downloaded in a moment of weakness, showed only one cache in the entire area. It was called the end of the line. The cache description was a single, chilling sentence for dedicated players only. Be prepared. It had been placed by Geodude87. This was it. This was his invitation. It wasn't just a message anymore, it was a destination. He wasn't just leading me to caches, he was leading me to a place of his choosing, a place where no one would hear me scream. The choice was no longer about whether to play the game, but about how it was going to end. For the next 24 hours, the coordinates for Black Creek Quarry burned a hole in my digital life. They sat on my phone screen, a stark black and white beacon to a place I knew I shouldn't go. Every rational thought in my head told me to call the police. But what would I tell them? That a guy on a treasure hunting app left me a creepy charm and a coffee mug. That he left a wooden nickel for me at a park. They'd think I was a paranoid crank. They'd tell me to block him and stop using the app. They wouldn't see the meticulous, terrifying pattern I saw. They wouldn't feel the cold dread that had become my constant companion. My fear was at war with a strange, empowering anger. Who was this guy? Who gave him the right to invade my life, to turn my attempt at building a new home for myself into a psychological prison? I felt like a character in a horror movie. the one everyone yells at for going into the dark basement. But this was my life, and I couldn't stand the thought of living in fear, of always looking over my shoulder, of letting him win. I had to know who he was. I had to see his face. So I made a plan. It was a stupid, reckless plan, born of equal parts terror and fury, but it was mine. I wasn't going to go to the quarry alone and unprepared. I wasn't going to walk into his trap. I was going to turn the tables. I told Sarah everything: the mug, the dragonfly, the quarry. I could hear the panic in her voice as she begged me to go to the cops, to pack a bag and come stay with her. Lucy, no, she pleaded. This is how people end up on the news. You don't know what he's capable of. And I won't know unless I do something, I argued, my voice sounding braver than I felt. I can't live like this, Sarah. I'm going, but I'm going to be smart about it. Can you just help me be smart? Reluctantly, she agreed. The plan was simple. I would go to the quarry, but I wouldn't go to the coordinates. Not directly. I would park my car somewhere else and hike in from a different direction. I would stay hidden. I would watch. Sarah would have my location shared on her phone in real time. We set up a check-in system. I had to text her every 15 minutes. If I missed 2 check-ins, she would call the police and give them my exact location and all the information I had on Geodude 87. For extra security, I bought a can of pepper spray, the heavy-duty kind meant for bears, and a personal alarm that emitted a piercing shriek. They felt like flimsy talismans against a phantom, but holding them in my hands made me feel a sliver of control. The next day, I drove towards the quarry. The sky was a flat, oppressive gray, threatening rain. The further I drove from the city, the more the houses and businesses gave way to dense forests and empty roads. My phone's signal bars began to drop, one by one. By the time I turned onto the gravel access road that led to the quarry, I had no service. My lifeline to Sarah was gone. For a moment, I considered turning back. This was it, the point of no return. But the image of that dragonfly, of my chipped mug, flashed in my mind. I gritted my teeth and kept driving. I parked my car about a mile from the quarry entrance, pulling it into a thicket of trees where it wouldn't be easily seen from the road. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gravel as I started my hike. I clutched the can of bear spray in my pocket, my thumb resting on the trigger. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth and decay. As I neared the coordinates, I veered off the main path, scrambling up a steep, wooded incline that overlooked the quarry pit. I found a spot behind a cluster of large boulders, a natural blind that gave me a clear view of the area below. And then I saw it. The cache. It wasn't hidden. It was placed right out in the open, on a flat ledge of rock near the quarry's edge. It was a large, military-style footlocker, far bigger than any cache needed to be. And sitting next to it, with his back to me, was a man. He was just sitting there, staring out at the murky, green water that filled the bottom of the quarry. He was dressed in hiking gear, a nondescript figure in browns and greens. He looked completely calm, completely patient, like he was waiting for an old friend. My blood turned to ice. It was him, Geodude 87. He was real. He was here. I stayed behind the rocks, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I watched him for what felt like an eternity. He didn't move, didn't check his phone. He just sat and waited. The trap was set. I was the prey, and he was the patient predator. The full weight of my stupidity crashed down on me. What was my plan? To confront him? To ask him why? Seeing him there, so real and so menacing in his stillness, I knew there was no conversation to be had. This wasn't a misguided admirer. This was something far more dangerous. Then he moved. He slowly stood up, stretched, and turned. For a split second, he looked in my direction, and my breath caught in my throat. But his gaze swept past my hiding spot. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A moment later, I felt a vibration from my own pocket. I had service again. A single bar, but it was there. A notification from the geocaching app lit up my screen. It was a message from Geodude87. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read it. It contained only 3 words. I know you're here. The woods, which had felt silent before, now seemed to be holding their breath. I was no longer the observer. I was seen. The hunter knew his prey was in the woods. The game had just reached its terrifying, final level. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I know you're here. The words echoed in the suffocating silence of the quarry. He knew. He had known all along. This wasn't a trap I could observe from a safe distance. I was already caught in it. My carefully constructed plan, my illusion of control, evaporated into the damp, gray air. He wasn't just waiting for me to show up at the coordinates, he was waiting for me to reveal myself. My first instinct was to run, to scramble back down the hill, find my car, and drive until the quarry was a distant memory. But my legs felt like lead. Where would I run? He was between me and the main path. If I made a sound, he would know my exact position. I was trapped on the high ground, my hiding place now a cage. I could see him below, slowly scanning the tree line, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. The fear was the point. My phone vibrated again. Another message. Did you like the gifts, Lucy? My name. He used my name. Hearing it, or rather, reading it in this context, felt like a physical blow. It confirmed the terrifying truth: this wasn't random. I had been specifically chosen, targeted. I thought back to every online interaction, every social media post, every detail of my life I had casually put out into the world. Where was the vulnerability? Where had I left a door open for this monster to walk through? Anger, white hot and fierce, surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the fear. I was not going to be some helpless victim in his twisted game. I wasn't going to die in an abandoned quarry because of some freak who got his kicks from terrorizing women. I gripped the can of bear spray, the cold metal a small comfort in my sweaty palm. I had the element of surprise and the high ground. It wasn't much, but it was something. He started walking, not towards me, but along the cliff's edge, circling towards the path I had used to climb up. He was cutting off my escape route. He was hurting me. I had to move, now. Staying put meant letting him corner me. Scrambling down the steep, rocky face of the hill was my only option. It was dangerous, but it was better than the alternative. I took a deep breath, holstered the bear spray in my jacket pocket, and began my descent. I moved as quietly as I could, using tree roots and rock outcroppings as handholds. Loose gravel skittered out from under my boots, cascading down the slope with a noise that sounded like an avalanche in the dead quiet. Below, I heard him stop walking. He'd heard me. "There you are," he called out, his voice calm and conversational, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had shouted. "No need to be shy. I just want to talk." I didn't answer. I moved faster, half sliding, half climbing down the embankment. My hands were scraped raw, my knee screamed in protest as I slammed it against a rock, but I didn't stop. I could hear him moving through the trees now, parallel to me, getting closer. The footlocker, the cache he'd left, was my goal. If I could get to the flat ledge, I'd have a straight shot to the main path and, hopefully, to my car. I burst out of the tree line and onto the rocky clearing. He was closer than I thought, maybe 50 feet away, standing near the path. He was a man in his mid-30s, with a forgettable face, plain, brown hair, a bit of stubble. He looked utterly normal. He looked like someone you'd stand behind in line at the grocery store. That was the most chilling part of all. He wasn't a monster from a movie, he was just a man. Jacob. I didn't know how I knew his name, but it felt right. He smiled that same unnerving, patient smile. That's it, Lucy. Come on out. Game's almost over. He took a step towards me. That's when I acted. I didn't scream. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the personal alarm from my pocket and yanked the pin. A deafening, high-pitched shriek ripped through the air, an alien sound in the natural stillness of the quarry. He flinched, his hands flying up to cover his ears, his face contorting in pain and surprise. In that moment of shocked hesitation, I ran. I sprinted past him, not towards the path he'd come from, but towards the footlocker. Adrenaline surged through me. As I passed the footlocker, I kicked it with all my might. It wasn't locked. The lid flew open, and its contents spilled out onto the rock. It was full of photographs. Hundreds of them. Photos of me walking to my car after work, me carrying groceries into my apartment building, me sitting by my window, drinking from that chipped coffee mug, me on the hiking trails, looking at my phone, completely unaware that I was being hunted. There were also items, a glove I'd lost a month ago, a scarf I thought I'd left at a coffee shop. It was a shrine to his obsession, a museum of his stalking. The sight of it, the sheer violation, fueled my flight. I didn't look back to see his reaction. I just ran, the piercing siren of the alarm still screaming behind me. I heard him shout my name, a sound full of rage now, not patience. I pumped my arms, my lungs burning, and focused on the gravel road ahead. I didn't know if he was chasing me. I didn't dare to look back. I reached my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in the lock. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. As I jammed the key in the ignition, I saw him emerge from the woods at the edge of the road, his face a mask of fury. I floored the gas pedal. The car fishtailed on the gravel, the tires spitting rocks before finding purchase and shooting forward. I saw him in my rearview mirror, a dwindling figure of rage, shrinking until he was gone. I didn't stop driving until I was back in the city, in the brightly lit parking lot of a police station. I walked in, shaking and covered in dirt and scratches, and told them everything. The geocaching, the gifts, the quarry. The photos were the proof they needed. They found his profile, GeoJude87, and from there, with data from the app company, they found him. His real name was Jacob. He had a history, I later learned. 2 prior stalking charges in another state. He'd used the trusting, public nature of the geocaching community as his personal hunting ground. He picked his victims from their public logs, learning their habits, their likes, their routines, before he began his slow, terrifying game of cat and mouse. I moved out of my apartment the next week. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of knowing he had seen me in my most private moments. I still live in Northwood, but I don't go hiking in the woods alone anymore. I deleted my geocaching account for good. Sometimes, when I see people walking in the park, their faces glued to their phones, I wonder if they're playing. I wonder if they know that sometimes, when you go looking for a treasure left by a stranger, you might just find a monster instead. And it makes me wonder how much of our lives do we unknowingly share, and who might be watching, waiting to turn our innocent games into their own personal horror story. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.